So thanks everyone. Just want to welcome you all to our phase two webinar with return to play, aligned with VIA Sport and the government's phase three. Before we get into the details, I just want to acknowledge and thank all of the members and clubs for all the work that you guys are doing at the local levels. We know that it's not easy. It's not easy at our level, and I know at the national level as well. But definitely at the local levels, it's really challenging. So we appreciate all the work that you guys have done under our phase one to get back to some form of soccer, and then under phase two as we work towards more normal type soccer activity, obviously within the modifications, restrictions that we need to put in place to align with VIA Sport and the government and what their wishes and expectations are. So just want to thank you for all the work there. And before we go, you'll see on the screen a number of individuals, those that participated last time around. You'll recognize all the faces, but I will just quickly go around and introduce everyone. So joining us from Canada Soccer is Earl Cochrane and Jason DeVos. So thank you both for joining us. From VIA Sport, we have Heather Beattie. Thank you, Heather. BC Soccer, we have our president, Kels Brosgard. And from staff, we have myself, Jason Elligot, with Laurie DeAndrea and Chris Cerrone. You'll also see Ryan's name up on there. He's helping facilitate the call today and dealing with all of the background stuff. So thanks, Ryan. Before we get into it, I'll just pass it over to Kelt for a couple of opening comments.
Thank you, Jason. I just want to echo your sentiments about the amount of work it's taken for us to get to this stage, and recognize Heather and VIA Sport and BC government for the work they've done. It's a really careful approach, and I, for one, believe it's the right approach, because we do wish to return to the game, to the format it used to be, but we have to be careful we don't overdo it. So I appreciate all the work that is going on by all our members. I know it's a huge challenge to get our members out there, because I know they want to play, but we have to be extremely careful. And Earl and Jason DeVos, thank you for taking the time from back east to join us today. It's much appreciated. Over to you, Jason.
Great, thanks. I know Earl and Jason were hoping this would be about 3 hours because they love being on the Zoom meetings, but we're going to keep it to about 45 minutes today if we can, to an hour, just to respect everybody's time. But similar to the previous one, we got some questions and inquiries. We lumped them together under about 6 or 7 different areas. We'll cover them off with responses. A lot of it was shared last week in our FAQ document. So some of it will be duplication there, but we also wanted to ensure we hosted this webinar because we said that we would provide it as an option for those that wanted to within the clubs and districts and leagues as well. So we'll get into it. The first one, lots of questions as anticipated around the cohorts and clarification on the cohorts. So some of the questions we got here was, can my team participate in cohorts outside of my club and district? Can it exceed the 50-person gathering limits? Can the cohorts be shuffled? And what's the purpose of the cohort model when people are going back to school and playing other sports? So I'll get into the first one there around the purpose. We're working within the guidelines that the government and VIA Sport have allowed us to work within. We do fully agree that it's a bit confusing that players and individuals can participate in multiple sports and go into schools, and they'll be in different bubbles and cohorts and those types of things. VIA Sport said with us, we can't control that activity, but what we can control is what's happening within our own individual sport. So for soccer, we're working to keep all participants within one cohort. The other piece there is the health authorities are asking people to limit their activity. There's no laws or rules around it, but they're just requesting people do that. So it's ultimately up to the individual people on what they're comfortable with. So we do agree that it is a bit confusing, and there is individuals that could be in multiple cohorts, but the jurisdiction that we have within soccer is obviously just to our sport. So around the outside of club activity, for the guidelines, the answer is yes. Phase one was solely in club. On the youth side now, that we can move to within district or neighboring district at their discretion. And then on the adult side, it's within the adult league environment. And generally speaking, our adult leagues work within geographical areas like the island, obviously Lower Mainland, Fraser Valley, Richmond, Burnaby. So those groups are already working within geographical areas. So keeping to those areas. The ultimate objective from the government here is to just try and limit organized travel. They don't want people carting all over the province, taking teams up to the Okanagan and all those types of things. It's keeping within your local communities as best as possible, being responsible to adhere to that. As far as the maximum gatherings cohorts, the definition that we have is 50 participants or 4 teams. So we do understand there is confusion there as well, because a cohort can go above 50 participants if rosters have more than, if rosters, for example, have 20 or more people on it, that would increase the cohort number, which is fine. And the government and BS Sport have allowed us to do that. Where it comes into the 50-person gathering limits is that you would only have 2 teams at the field at any one time. So as an example, you got 4 teams with 25 players in the adult soccer. You couldn't have all those players in the cohort participating at one location at the same time. But you can have 2 teams there because you're within the limits of the 50 gathering. There's an example on how the cohorts model could apply, keeping to the 50 gathering limits, but having a cohort above the 50 participant. The reshuffling of cohorts. So yes, we can do that if participants or teams within a cohort need to be adjusted. The guidelines allow for that, as long as a 2-week break occurs in between activity. Next question that we got was around the gathering limits and do we need to adhere to it? And the short answer is yes. It's in our guidelines. We do need to adhere to the 50-person gathering limits, which is coming down from the BC government. Next question we got was around registration submission and when player registration submissions will we do? We're going to keep to our regular timelines on submission of that information. Our finance personnel are working on a memo that will be circulated to the youth districts and adult leagues within probably about the next week or so to provide a bit more clarity on those timelines with regard to registration. So that'll be coming out shortly to everyone to give a bit more insight and information. Next question we got was around the spitting and nose clearing, and will referees be managing this? So it's we got guidance from Canada Soccer on this one, specifically within the refereeing area, and the answer is that the referees can only manage based on the laws of the game, and spitting, they can only give out cautions and fouls and whatnot when it's directed at somebody. So if somebody just spits, but not directed at someone, the referees can't do anything, is the guidance that we've got. So we're putting it on to the coaches to just remind their players that it's not a nice part of the game in general, and to try and avoid it and stay away from it. If they do, to follow the guidelines around substituting the player and having them sit for a period of time. So those are kind of the ones that we've got in those areas there. I'll pass it over to Chris, who we got a few around coaching and other sort of kind of technical specific items.
Thanks, Jason. Morning all. I'll go straight into them. We had a question on indoor soccer. Is indoor soccer allowed? What guidelines must I follow for soccer indoor? Yep, you still must apply to the guidelines that are documented, as well as any other items that the facility owner, city or municipality might have in play as well. So that's an item to consider. And we're aware that Canada Soccer are working on a document that provides some more guidance for indoor soccer. Jason L., I don't know if you want to bring a bit more life to that or not, but that should be coming down from above as well.
I'll add something very quickly. Yes, we're working on a document that we hope to be able to share with the provinces and territories within the next sort of week or two. And then the hope is that they will then be able to share that down as an example of maybe how you can construct your plan to go indoor. But we would also suggest that if you want to go back into the assessment tool and reassess what your plan looks like to go back indoors, you're more than welcome to do that. The tool itself has a level of risk in it that outlines indoor play, and what it does is ultimately heighten the risk and then requires you to sort of deliver more mitigation against that risk. So you can certainly use the assessment tool again, but yeah, we hope to have that document out in the next couple of weeks.
Thanks, Earl. Thanks for adding to that. We had 3 questions specifically on coaching. I'll read them straight out. Why are we having kick-ins as opposed to throw-ins? We're aware other sports like baseball, volleyball don't have these restrictions in place. Under phase 2 guidelines, this is really a precaution that was suggested to us from Viasport and Canada. So we wanted to honour that under the phase 2 guidelines documented. Another coaching point highlighted that players can't touch the ball with their head. Does this mean heading the ball won't be allowed when gameplay returns? Again, the intent of this is really to limit touch points. So players can head the ball. However, we're trying to encourage less heading, for an example, in the training environment. Obviously, in game environments, it will happen naturally. The last one under coaching would be if you have staff coaches who work with a number of teams in the club, will they have to work with one team or can they work with many? Noting that there's the cohort groups in place. Within the guidelines, coaches don't necessarily have to be included in that cohort number. If they're not included, they need to keep the distance measures in place, obviously as best as possible. So a coach can work across a number of teams as long as they're not included in that cohort. We had some parent items as well. As you all know, we're reliant on some parents to be assistant referees in some circumstances. Is that still okay to have them participate in that way? We felt that this is the norm and is probably reasonable to still be in place under phase 2 guidelines. And then the last one from me, we have a number of questions on goalkeeper equipment. What are the suggestions for teams that only have one gloves per team with goalkeepers rotating or players rotating? Again, the realities is trying to limit the sharing of equipment, specifically goalkeeper gloves as best as possible. So that's a little item on the equipment for goalkeepers. Jason, I'll send it back to yourself.
Great. Thanks, Chris. So that kind of covers us off for the kind of formal questions that we received kind of in writing. So Ryan, I don't know if there's been any comments or questions that have come in, but I'll pass it over to you to kind of help facilitate if there's any questions from any of the individuals that have joined us here today.
Hi, thanks, Jason. Yes, we did get a question. And the question is, if someone in a cohort tests positive, does a whole cohort have to go into quarantine? And if they do, teams then want out of the season, are there any refunds?
So as far as the testing, that was included in our FAQs document. I may lean on Heather a little bit here, but the guidance that we're getting from Viasport is report to the local health authorities, and they will take charge on what next steps are as far as quarantining or canceling or any of that activity within the team or cohort environment. That's not a sports specific item. That's a health authority item, and it's not for us to determine what happens. It's for them to determine. Heather, is that?
Yeah, that's the direction we've been given directly from health officials. So as an organization, you don't want to, or you don't need to try to figure out what the next steps are. Is defer to whatever health directives you're provided. There certainly is a good chance that the team that individual is on will be asked to quarantine, and depending when that team maybe came in contact with the other teams, there is a possibility of that occurring as well. But again, the health officials are the experts, so defer to what they're telling you to do.
Great, thanks, Heather. And then I guess to the second part of that is around refunds. That would be probably more localized with the club on how they want to manage any refunds should activity be canceled and what that looks like. Obviously, we can provide guidance and support there, but in the first instance, I'd probably go to the club on how they'd like to handle it.
We have a couple more questions as well. I do see that there are questions being typed in. I ask that all attendees, once these questions are addressed, please raise your hand using the raise hand function, and I will unmute you and allow you to ask the question. So the second question is, what is our direction around bench areas and protocol for subs?
You mean on the sidelines? Chris, do you want to cover that one?
Yeah, so obviously physical distancing has to maintain on the sidelines, and we're aware that some of the bench areas are small and might not be able to have every player honour that and staff member within that bench or designated zone. So the reality is they'll have to be spread along the sideline, and that's for clubs and team staff to manage that during game day.
It's also not lost on us the strange requirement here on being on the sidelines and being apart. But then as soon as you step on the field, you can come in contact, and you're already inside a cohort, and you're allowed to train together and have contact. So it's definitely not lost on us that it's confusing that we're asking people to stay apart on the sidelines until you get onto the field. But we're adhering to what the health authorities and VIA Sport are requiring us to do. So it's it's a bit of a strange one, but it is what it is.
The next question we have is, are there any guidelines around physios/trainers on site that aren't part of team staff, and what they can and can't do if they might see multiple teams during a day?
That's a good question. To be honest, I don't know if that's been addressed. Heather, can you address that? Great.
Yeah, so physios and trainers, if they have any type of professional designation, they have pretty high standards that they're required to follow. And I believe that they're all required to wear masks at all time when they're interacting with anyone. So from that standpoint, then it isn't therefore as much of an issue if they're interacting with multiple people or attending multiple games. So you would want to count them into the number of people that you have at your gathering, but you can be less concerned about their ability to interact with the individuals that are there.
Thanks, Heather.
Okay, we have Jody Stanley from Metro Women's Soccer League has raised her hand. Jody, feel free to ask.
So we've got numerous questions from our members, but one of them was, so in the middle of play, the ball hits the hand, or there's a handball. Will there be stoppage of play, wiping down the ball? Or is that the referee? Who's responsible for that? Yeah, they want to.
That would be regular gameplay activity. So if there's a handball, the referee would blow a handball and go to a indirect free kick or direct free kick, depending on the location of the field. Just like regular activity.
So no sanitizing of it or anything afterwards?
No, we've not been instructed that we need to do that during gameplay.
Thank you.
We have a question from Linda Tranter with the North Shore Women's Over 30-something League. Linda? Hi, Linda. You may need to unmute your mic.
Oh, sorry about that. Just a follow-on about the hands touching the ball, and you're saying not to sanitize the ball during game, but there's a question of are we required to sanitize the balls after game play, or is there a guideline that if they sit outdoors for a certain number of days, we're okay with them?
Heather, can you help with that one as far as equipment is concerned?
Yeah, I think the advice is to sanitize afterwards, but I think there is some guidance that I won't speak to the exact number of days or hours that any disease can live on, but I can look into that and see, if you weren't using the ball for 3 days, what impact would that have? Yeah, I'll get back to you, Jason, with an answer on that.
Okay, that's great. And that's what previously the guidance was, exactly as you suggested, Linda. I think that you could leave them out and it would be fine, or wipe them down, whichever makes the most sense for the situation.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we have a question from Stuart Bancroft with the Lower Island Soccer Association. You may need to unmute your mic, Stuart.
Maybe his microphone's not working, Ryan.
Yeah, if you're having trouble with your microphone, Stuart, feel free to type it into the chat to all panelists and we'll be able to address it then. In the meantime, we do have a question from Jody Stanley with Metro Women's again.
Hi, sorry. With the kick-ins instead of throw-ins, right? Some of the people are concerned, you know, when a kick-in is in the attacking third and it will change the style of the game. Is there any guidelines around how that kick-in will occur? Like, is it, you know, some people saying, you know, below the waist or side foot pass, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's maybe Chris, you can help with this one, but right now it's being stated as a kind of indirect free kick, so the referee can apply it as an indirect free kick. And we're hoping that individuals don't use it as a gameplay, but we know that that's an opportunity for people to, as you get into the final third, to use it as a corner and whatnot. Hopefully people are just respecting the fact of what we're trying to achieve here. There was discussion around keeping it below the knee or below the hip and or waist. The challenge with that is then, is it on the referee to, oh, it went above the waist and it's really challenging to manage. So it's more so we're keeping to the indirect free kick. But Chris, is there anything more you want to add to that?
Yeah, obviously these are strange times with the modified rule concepts. But I think the messaging has to be, can we try and keep the game as close to normal as possible? And when a kick-in occurs, you know, ideally the philosophy is, can we get the game going as quick as possible and probably as short and sharp as possible as well? And that recreates more of a throw-in example rather than this new modified rule that hopefully won't be in existence once we're out of phase two for groups to take advantage of the situation. So from a technical standpoint, we're drawing that attention to technical directors and club coaches to say, what are we really trying to achieve with this? It's a health requirement. And can we get the game going as quick as possible as the priority to this?
Yeah, just kind of adding to Chris's comment there, is that hopefully this is something that could change. Like, this is a measure that we have in place right now. But BS Sport has even said too, is that this is a stepping stone. So hopefully in whether it's a few months or whatever that looks like, is that we can potentially go back to regular throw-ins. But again, that'll be at a future date for now.
We've received the question from Stuart. The question is, are multiple cohorts allowed on a field at one time during training while maintaining distance between cohorts and adhering to the 50 person on a field guideline?
Yes.
Question from Jeremy at Lake Hill Soccer Association. Is there any dispensation for goalkeeper training? Can they do that and be in a cohort as well, since it's basically impossible for them to train in only one cohort?
I don't understand the question. Are you talking about separate individual goalkeeper training that's occurring amongst goalkeepers?
If you're comfortable, Jeremy, I can unmute you and allow you to ask. He doesn't have a mic. He says yes to your question.
Okay. So if I understand it correctly, or if we understand it correctly, it's we need players to keep to the one cohort. So as an example, if there's 4 teams in one cohort, there's debatable in the age group, but there could be 2 goalkeepers per team if there's a first keeper and a backup keeper. So on within a 4-team cohort, you would have potentially 8 goalkeepers. Those goalkeepers are allowed to interact with each other because they're within that same cohort. So you could run goalkeeper training within that cohort for that group. But you wouldn't be able to take the goalkeepers from one cohort and mix and mingle them with other goalkeepers from another cohort. So I hope that was clear and answered your question, Jeremy.
He says, thank you. We have a question from Jody with Metro Women's. Will youth to senior permits be allowed?
Permitting is an interesting one because essentially those players are already in cohorts. So in the short term, individuals will be in their one cohort and keep to that cohort. If a player wants to move into another cohort, they would need to take a 2-week break and move into that cohort. So the normal type permitting activity that occurs not only from youth to adult, but youth to youth and those types of things is not being encouraged or done in the short term. I know within the Chris can probably speak to this much better than I can, but around the kind of the BCSPL and also within the BCCSL, I think both of those bodies and leagues have decided to not do any sort of permitting because they need to keep the cohorts. So Chris, is there anything more you want to add there? Or does that capture it?
No, that's correct.
I don't see any more questions or any more hands up. Oh, I may have spoke too soon. Linda from North Shore Women's has another question.
I just wanted to circle back, Chris, with your comments regarding goalie gloves. Many of our teams don't have 1 or 2 dedicated goalies. They kind of circle around and everybody kind of gets a chance at playing in goal. We did have one question, maybe because the finance is concerned of having to buy gloves for everybody. Is there a chance of, putting latex gloves inside to switch the gloves out? Or is there kind of like the game ball, is there a time where they can just sit and be reused, say a week later?
Yeah, I suppose I'll pass this one to Jason and Heather. Is there any overarching items around gloves on gloves?
That's a really tricky one. So we have got the question before, excuse me, about goalkeeper gloves, and if you let them sit, does that meet the requirement? And to be honest, I don't know the answer to that. And I also know that it's not necessarily practical for every single player that's going to potentially go on goal to buy gloves themselves. So it's definitely a tricky one. I know for the younger, maybe not necessarily for yourself, Linda, in the women's league, but with the younger kids, they don't necessarily need to have gloves as well. They could just play goalkeeper without gloves is an option. I don't know if that's something that you would like to consider within your league. I don't know, Heather, is there any sort of guidance around that you can help us with?
Not that I've heard directly, but I've written it down, so I will take that back. We actually have a meeting tomorrow with an epidemiologist where I may be able to get some guidance on that.
Great. So on that note, and I know we'll carry on if there's more questions, but what we will do, as we said before, is we'll update our FAQ documents as we get more information and more responses. So that's where we'll be able to put that information once we get it through Heather and VIA Sport. So thank you, Linda. Those are good questions.
Thank you.
We have 2 more questions from the chat. The next question is there a plan to monitor players participating in different cohorts, specifically associate member academies?
Well, what we've said in our FAQ document is, if there is individuals looking for supplemental training and they're going to get it outside of their cohort, then that other environment needs to adhere to kind of the phase 1 terms, so the distance training measures. There's nothing right now in place for us to monitor multiple cohort, or not cohort, but multiple participation in different soccer environments. But that's the same as all of our rules and regulations, as we all know, is that BC Soccer is not the police, neither is Canada Soccer, neither is VIA Sport, is we're all collectively in this together, and hopefully everybody's working under the guidelines as outlined, so that we can all hopefully progress to future phases.
And then the next question is, have referees been given direction regarding the rosters and keeping track of players that were at the game?
Sorry, Ryan, can you repeat that?
Have referees been given direction regarding the rosters and keeping track of players that were at the game?
I would imagine that the leagues that or the clubs or district, whoever's organizing that soccer activity, would know what teams are at the locations, and the fields would be at the rosters. That wouldn't necessarily be on the individual referees to know who's on the field. They have the rosters through the clubs and teams and leagues that they're participating in. If I'm understanding correctly the question.
Jason, I can just add to that. That's part of the regular process for games. So there's nothing new there, but they would continue to follow the regular player check-in process.
Great, thank you, Lori.
The next question is, if a club wants to run a house league for adults to keep them in a cohort outside of a normal adult league, how do BC Soccer fees work, specifically around insurance?
That's again, that's a good question. I think that's one that we could potentially take offline. I don't know which club is asking that question, but that's something we can explore with that club and potentially apply that to other areas. Right now, the mechanism to register players, adult players, I should say, is through our adult leagues because those are our members. But obviously, these are interesting times that we're working in, and we don't want to say no to activity that could support players playing soccer. So maybe we'll take that one kind of offline and explore that further. So Ryan, maybe you can make a note of who that is, and we can follow up after. You don't need to say who it is now.
Okay, I'll follow up. And then we've received a question regarding whether there should be any discipline if players or organizations refuse to adhere to the cohorts.
So this, so if I understand correctly, is that people aren't following the directives of VIA Sport and BC Soccer?
Mm-hmm.
That's the concern, and what happens?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so similar to all of the rules and regulations that we have in place, is the independent judicial process would take effect. So if a group's not following it, it's essentially a directive obviously through the government, VIA Sport, into BC Soccer and also Canada Soccer. So a complaint would come in and would be reviewed under our regular independent judicial process, and potential sanctions could apply, whether that's to individuals or the organizations themselves. So that process would be the same. Hopefully that doesn't actually happen, because everyone knows the world that we're operating in right now.
And I don't see any other questions in chat, and I don't see any raised hands. If there aren't any further questions, now would be the time to ask them. We have a question from Vince at the Vancouver Island Soccer League. What process will leagues need to follow if clubs and/or individual teams from affiliated groups decide to have competition?
Sorry, I don't understand the question. If teams and clubs in your league decide they want to play? Vince, maybe you can share your screen and we can hear you.
I've turned on your ability to talk, Vince, if you'd like to speak into the microphone.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, I guess my question sort of comes into where we have the unaffiliated groups that decide to put on whatever event. So we've established that we're going to have our cohorts of 4. That's great. Now, other unaffiliated groups are going to run their own little tournaments or 7-a-side or whatever the case may be. I'm assuming that they have to choose one or the other to be in. But when and if it does happen that they want to participate in both, does that sort of come back up over into the discipline aspect of things and it gets forwarded on to essentially BC Soccer to handle discipline-wise?
Yeah, we can look at that on a case by case. It's probably similar to the response we've given previously. Whether we like it or not, our jurisdiction does not extend itself to non-members. So if there's people even outside of these crazy times that want to play in unaffiliated and affiliated soccer, there's rules preventing that. It's just when it comes to light, and it does go through the judicial process to review. And again, it comes down to the other statement we had earlier around essentially what the health authorities are wanting people to limit their activity. So hopefully people respect that. And again, everyone has their own kind of threshold on comfort level and those types of things. But ultimately, our jurisdiction only extends to our own membership. So, and I know that, again, Vince, you know that sort of stuff as well. So I don't know if that helps and that answers your question or not.
He said in the chat that it answers it.
Okay, great.
And with that, is there any other questions from any attendees? There doesn't appear to be so.
Okay, great. Ryan, thank you for facilitating it. Thanks to everybody who did attend, and special thanks to the panel members who joined us here, Jason, Earl, and Heather. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to sit with us today. It was very helpful, and we'll follow up with those additional questions. Kel, thank you for joining in, and Chris and Lori as well for your support. But again, most importantly to the members and clubs that did join, and the great questions that we've got, and those that we do need to take away and get responses to, we'll do that as quickly as we can, and continue to look back on our return to play page of our website. We'll update with information as we have it, including the FAQs document. So thank you everybody for taking the time today, and take care.